The 2026 NFL Draft is full of elite talent along the defensive line. Let's break down the top 5 defensive linemen with our expert, Ryan McCrystal. I'm Warren Sharp. This is Sharp Football Analysis, and we're joined by Ryan McCrystal, an NFL draft expert who is known for his accuracy in being able to prognosticate what general managers will actually do during the NFL draft. The top 100 players selected each year is what's considered a big board. Ryan McCrystal has the highest big board score in history, according to the Huddle Report. He also has been the #1 most accurate big board drafter as recently as 2021 and currently ranks 7th most accurate over the last 5 years. He's a great guest to bring on to talk a little bit about this defensive line class, who is elite from top to bottom. I think it's going to be a very interesting draft to see where these guys go off the board. And let's first start by talking about your #1 defensive line prospect, and that's David Bailey out of Texas Tech. What makes him so special?
Yeah, David Bailey is the top guy on my board, and I see him as a legit blue chip prospect in this draft class, one of the few in this draft class, because he's so explosive as an edge rusher. He tends to win with speed, but he also has an array of pass rush moves that he can break out. He can beat you in different ways, and so as an offensive lineman facing up against him, you really can't anticipate what he's going to throw at you because he can come at you a number of different ways. He can win with pure speed, bending around the edge. He can convert that speed to power. He can cut inside and beat you that way. He beats you in just so many different ways that it's hard to plan your attack against him. And so I see him playing at a really high level right out of the gate as a pass rusher. Now, the concern and the reason why some people might hesitate to call him a blue chip prospect is he doesn't necessarily have the length and the strength, which raises some questions about his ability to defend the run. My response to that would be, we've seen him play at a decent level against the run in college. I don't think he's going to be a liability in the NFL against the run. It just may never be a strength of his game. And in this era of the NFL, if you're just okay against the run, but you're elite as a pass rusher, then you're an elite defender. That's all you need to be able to do. You can live with somebody who's not necessarily dominant against the run if they're getting after the quarterback at a high rate. And one of my comparisons for David Bailey is Jared Allen, who I think was very similar in the fact that he was a dominant pass rusher and wasn't always great against the run. It wasn't always a strength of his game through various parts of his career. There were moments when he certainly made plays because he was so fast and strong, but you certainly would not say that that was his signature in the NFL. He was a pass rusher first, and he was good enough against the run over the course of his career, and he's in the Hall of Fame. So I think if David Bailey can just, be 90% of Jared Allen, you're going to be very happy drafting him in the top 5.
All right, your #2 best defensive lineman is a player who didn't actually play defensive line traditionally at college, and that's Arvell Reese out of Ohio State, who's going to be making that position shift in the NFL. Talk to us about what makes his trait so elite that can allow for that position shift and how you think he projects in the NFL.
Yeah, deciding where to rank Arvell Reese is really tricky because the traits are crazy. If he ends up being the #1 prospect to come out of this draft class and ends up in the Hall of Fame, I'm not going to be shocked. He has the traits to do that. But like you said, he was an off-ball linebacker at Ohio State. Not only that, he was a 1-year starter. So you've got a 1-year starter who's switching positions in the NFL. That's the definition of a boom or bust prospect. So I can't rate him ahead of David Bailey, even though I could certainly, I would certainly listen to an argument that his ceiling is the highest of any prospect at any position in this class. That's a legitimate argument you could make. I'm just not going to have a guy who's changing positions as a 1-year starter in the NFL ranked that high, even though I'm certainly excited about the ceiling. I think one of the reasons why he's being talked about as being one of such a special prospect and why there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of pushback in the general conversation around him being a top 5 pick is because the last guy to make this transition was Micah Parsons, and he made it look easy. I mean, from day one with the Cowboys, he made the switch from linebacker to defensive end, and there were no issues whatsoever. He just immediately stepped into the league and was one of the best pass rushers. If that went poorly for Micah Parsons, I wonder what the conversation would be like around Arvell Reese if Parsons struggled with that transition. I bet that there would be a little bit more pushback and that people wouldn't be as quick to lock him into like a top 5 slot in terms of the mock drafts and whatnot. Now, this isn't a great class overall, so I think the fact that Reese has such a high ceiling is one of the reasons why he's going to be drafted. Definitely in the top 10, probably in the top 5. That's a factor in where players end up ultimately getting slotted. I do just want to point out that even though I'm really high on him, man, is it risky to ask a guy to switch positions when he's so inexperienced. So the bust factor is very real. It could go very sideways despite the high ceiling.
Your number 3 ranked defensive lineman is Reuben Bain Jr. out of Miami. Obviously, the whole world was talking about his arm length at the combine, but go a little bit deeper than that. Talk to us about his strengths, and then can he offset that arm length? And where do you really think that teams are going to have him ranked at the next level?
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the arm length. I don't think it's something that you could just completely write off and say it's a non-factor, even though it didn't matter a whole lot in college. What he does well is he converts speed to power. And so he's going to be able to jolt offensive linemen, throw them off balance, and he's going to be able to win that way. The reason why it's a little bit of a concern is he's not elite at bending around the edge and just winning with pure speed. If he were better at that, I'd be less concerned, because when you're bending around the edge, you're not engaging with offensive linemen as much. And so the length of your arms just is less of a factor. You're shedding blocks less frequently if you're just winning with pure speed around the edge. Bain can do that. He's going to get some wins just with pure speed around the edge, but he's going to be facing more really high-end athletes at the offensive tackle position in the NFL. And so it's just not going to happen as frequently as it did in college at times against some of those ACC tackles that he was facing. It's a little bit of a concern, and it's going to be a little bit of a concern in the run game as well. That's why I'm not going to bump him up as high as I have David Bailey, who doesn't have elite arm length, but we certainly see him play a physical style at a better level, I think, in college than we've seen with Bain. So the arm length, I think, is going to be a factor that holds him back in certain matchups, but because he can convert speed to power so well, it's really impressive the way he does that. The fact that he's a little bit smaller almost works to his advantage. And so in certain matchups where he's not going up against elite athletes at the tackle position, I think he's still going to be successful. So I think the floor is high for him to be a good pass rusher, even if the arm length does affect his ability in certain matchups.
That makes sense. Your number 4 best defensive lineman of the 2026 draft class is Kendrick Faulk out of Auburn, only 20 years old. What are some of the best things that he will bring to the table in the NFL?
Yeah, Faulk's an interesting evaluation because of how he was used at Auburn. They moved him around on the defensive line a little bit. He even had a few snaps at nose tackle, despite the fact that he's a pretty good athlete out on the edge. I think that the general conversation around Faulk has been he wasn't productive enough to warrant being drafted in the top 15 to 20 picks, which is where he probably goes. And if you just look at the raw numbers, you can certainly see why that question would be raised. Normally, guys drafted in that range were elite producers at the college level, and Faulk was not that guy as a pass rusher. But where he lined up had a big factor in that. He lined up from the 7-tech spot or wider only 60% of the time last year. A lot of the edge rushers that we're talking about are at 85% or higher. Some of the guys who might come off the board in the first round, like Texas A&M's Cassius Howell, were even at 100% of his pass rush snaps lined up from that wide position. You're going to win more often if you're lined up wide because you're not engaging with offensive tackles as much. You're able to just use speed and just fly into the backfield. It's much easier when you're lining up in those wide positions. And so the fact that they were using his strength and pushing him inside more often, it was naturally going to suppress his pass rush production. And so I'm less concerned about that. When he did line up wide, he generated a very solid 15% pressure rate. So if you wanted to just use him in that role, I think he would be productive. I think the best way to use him, though, is the way Auburn did. Take advantage of his versatility. He does have the speed to win on the outside, but he's also has the strength to win if you line him up inside. You could even line him up as a 3-tech defensive tackle on passing downs, I think, if you wanted to take advantage of his athleticism on the inside. So I think he's going to be a great fit for a defense that likes to use multiple fronts. Somewhere like New Orleans or Carolina could be a great fit for one of those NFC South teams that likes to get creative in how they line up on defense. He could be the perfect fit for that system.
All right, your number 5 best defensive lineman of the 2026 NFL draft is Zion Young out of Missouri. Talk to us a little bit about this prospect.
Young might not have the ceiling of some of the other guys that we have talked about so far because he's more of a power rusher. And the guys who can win with speed, they have the highest ceiling because you can really wreak havoc if you're the type of guy who can just fly into the backfield right off the snap by beating your man with pure speed. Those are the most dangerous guys, and that's not Young's strength. He's going to beat you with power, but he does so consistently and has played against good opponents and been productive against even the best opponents on Missouri's schedule, that I'm pretty high on him in terms of being able to transition that to the league smoothly, because he's proven it against the high end competition. Is he's sort of the same guy day in and day out. Whatever game you turn on, he's winning with power in every matchup. And so, I would concede that his ceiling is not quite as high as some of the guys who can win with pure speed, but I love the power that he brings to the game. And because he is the type of guy who brings with power, there's also no concern that he's going to be someone who has to come off the field in certain situations. He can be a guy who goes out there and plays every snap for you if you want to ask him to do that. Because of the power in his game, he's going to succeed on early downs just as well as he is going to be able to win as a power rusher on passing downs. So he's sort of the complete package in that way. Even if the ceiling is a little bit lower, I feel good about him being a solid starter in the league.
So those are your top 5 defensive linemen. Those also all happen to be edge rushers. And I'm curious, Ryan, you rank those guys on your big board, top 19. All 5 of those guys fit into the top 19 of the draft. Who would be the best interior defensive lineman of this draft class, in your opinion?
Yeah, this isn't a great class for the defensive tackles. One of the reasons I don't have a lot of defensive tackles ranked highly is I think a lot of the better prospects at that position are nose tackles. And at least when I'm putting together my board, I'm bumping nose tackles down a little bit because they're just not as useful the way the game is played today. Yeah, there's moments in the game where you want to have a good defensive tackle on the sideline when you can bring him out and for a key rundown situation. But for the most part, you want everybody on your defensive line to be able to get after the quarterback. So someone like Caden McDonald, who's a very good nose tackle, he doesn't get after the quarterback, and so I'm just less interested. I'm not going to invest a high pick in him. So the defensive tackle that I'm most interested in is Caleb Banks. I think he has the traits to have a really high ceiling. He's got the size. You're going to be able to play him on early downs, and he can stop the run, but he's also athletic, and at his size, to have the athleticism that he has, he could be a really disruptive force. Now, the reason he didn't crack my top 5 and the reason why there's a chance he's not even a first round pick this year, the consistency is kind of all over the map. He was really up and down throughout the course of his career, and he was plagued by injuries last year. So you've got a guy who was inconsistent and he's coming off an injury. That raises some red flags that might scare teams off investing a high pick in him. But the profile of the traits, that if it all came together, he sort of has the raw tools of a Chris Young. Like if it all comes together for him, he could be a really special player like Young. So, or like Chris Jones, I'm sorry. If he could be that type of disruptive force as a big guy who also has the athleticism to be disruptive in the middle of a defensive line, that's why he's my number 1 guy. Is a guy, he can be a 3-down defensive tackle who has the strength to dominate against the run, but also the athleticism to get after as a pass rusher. And there just aren't that many guys who have that kind of a ceiling in this year's class.
No, and just hearing his name mentioned in the same sentence with Chris Jones, sends chills up my spine. I'm not sure if he'd be able to live up to that level, but man, Chris Jones, what an outstanding player for so many years. This was Ryan McCrystal's top 5 defensive linemen, plus a bonus interior defensive lineman for this year's 2026 NFL draft class. If you want more outstanding analysis just like this, make sure that you're subscribed and make sure that you head over to sharp.football. Sign up for our free newsletter where we're sending out a ton of free draft content